In November 2025, something happened in London that should have been impossible. The British government was about to deliver one of the biggest budget speeches of the decade. Cameras rolling, reporters in position, bond traders holding their breath. And then, about half an hour before the Chancellor stood up to speak, the entire budget leaked online by accident. Not by a hacker, not by a journalist, by the official government office whose only job is to keep it secret. The whole speech, posted by mistake, for everyone on Earth to read before she opened her mouth. Imagine an NFL coach accidentally posting his playbook on Instagram an hour before the Super Bowl. That is basically what happened. And the strangest part? It barely made the news outside the UK. Because in modern Britain, this kind of thing has somehow become normal. The country that invented modern banking, modern democracy, and the modern stock exchange just leaked its own homework to the class, and nobody really blinked. That moment is the perfect way to start this video, because it captures everything you need to understand about what is happening in Britain right now. The UK is not crashing. It is not collapsing. It is doing something much worse. It is quietly falling apart in slow motion. And the people in charge of stopping it appear to be busy doing the opposite. So today, I want to walk you through 3 exhibits, 3 pieces of evidence. By the end, I think you will agree that Britain is not just going through a rough patch. It might be the most important warning sign for every developed country in the world right now. Exhibit 1. The math no longer adds up. Britain is now a country where you can have a full-time job, a degree, and 0 debt, and still not afford a 1-bedroom flat in your own capital city. The average rent in central London is now over £2,500 a month. The average salary for a young professional is around £35,000 a year. After tax, after national insurance, after student loan repayments, you take home maybe £2,200 a month, which means rent alone eats more than 100% of your paycheck. Not a typo, more than your entire monthly take-home pay. So either you live with 3 flatmates in a flat designed for 1, or you move home with your parents, or you leave the country. There is no 4th option. And for a place that calls itself the 5th biggest economy in the world, that is not a small problem. That is the whole problem. Here is the kicker that nobody outside the UK seems to know. Britain's GDP per person is now lower than Mississippi's. Yes, Mississippi, the poorest state in America. If the UK were a US state, it would rank dead last in average income. 60 years ago, Britain was richer than France, richer than Germany, richer than Italy. Today, Britain is poorer than Alabama. The sun didn't just set on the British Empire, it set on British wages. Exhibit 2. The government is making it worse on purpose. In the last 2 years alone, the UK government has raised taxes by £66 billion. That is not a typo either. £66 billion in fresh taxes dropped on top of an already heavy tax burden. By 2030, Britain will have the highest tax burden in its entire peacetime history, 38% of GDP. To pay for what? Well, mostly to pay the interest on debt the government has already racked up. UK government borrowing hit £138 billion last year. The Bank of England's interest rate is 3.75%. Do the math, and the country is now spending more on debt interest than it spends on schools. Read that again. More on interest than on schools. So how do you fund a hole that big? You raise taxes. And not in the obvious way. The British government has gotten very clever about it. They froze the income tax thresholds until 2031, which means every time your salary creeps up to keep pace with inflation, more of your money slides into a higher tax band. You feel slightly richer on paper. You take home slightly less in real money. It is a stealth tax, the kind of tax that makes the news exactly never. On top of that, they added a tax on milkshakes, a tax on electric cars, a tax on family farms passed down through generations, a mansion tax on homes over £2 million, which sounds fancy until you remember that in London, a mansion is basically a 4-bedroom semi-detached house with a small garden and a sad-looking shed. The British government is taxing everything that does not move, and many things that do. Exhibit 3. The smart money is already leaving. Here is where the story goes from sad to genuinely alarming. Between 2024 and 2025, Britain lost more high-net-worth individuals to other countries than any nation on Earth except for China. That is not a finance blog headline. That is the actual data. The doctors, the engineers, the founders, the investors, the people who pay the biggest tax bills and create the most jobs are quietly packing up and moving to Dubai, Singapore, Australia, the US, and Switzerland. At this point, the departures lounge at Heathrow has become Britain's most reliable export terminal, And here's the part that makes the situation almost impossible to fix. The more wealthy people leave, the less tax revenue the government collects. The less revenue, the more they need to raise rates on whoever is still there. The more they raise rates, the more people leave. This is not a theory. This is gravity. Economists actually have a name for this. They call it the Laffer curve. Past a certain point, raising tax rates lowers your tax revenue because the people you are taxing simply disappear. And Britain may already be on the wrong side of that line. I know a guy in finance I will call James. James ran a small but successful asset management firm in London. 2 offices, 40 employees. He moved his whole operation to Dubai last year. Not because Dubai is a more exciting city. He told me, I love London, but I cannot run a business when half my paycheck disappears before I even see it, and the other half buys less every year. James is not unusual anymore. James is the rule now, not the exception. And every James who leaves takes a small piece of the British tax base with him. Now here is what I find the most uncomfortable about all of this. None of it is happening because of a war, a pandemic, or a financial crash. It is happening on autopilot, slowly, boringly, in normal weather. The UK is the first major Western economy to demonstrate what happens when you mix too much debt, too little growth, and a political class that cannot agree on what to cut, what to grow, or what to save. And the rest of the world should be watching very closely because every G7 country has at least some of the same ingredients sitting in its kitchen. A few things worth keeping an eye on as this story keeps unfolding. The pound is the first place to look. Currencies tell the truth before politicians do. If sterling keeps drifting lower against the dollar and the euro, that is the global market quietly downgrading its opinion of Britain in real time. The second place is UK 10-year bond yields. Bonds are how governments borrow. When yields spike, it means investors are getting nervous about whether they will get paid back. The UK already had a bond mini-crisis back in 2022 that nearly broke the country's pension system overnight. Another one is not impossible. The third place is the next election. Reform UK is now leading the polls. If they win, the country is going to test out a very different economic playbook. Whether that playbook works is a question history will answer, not Twitter. So here's what I genuinely want from you. Tell me which version of Britain's future you see. Is it A, the slow Italian path, where the country quietly stagnates for decades and slowly turns into a beautiful but financially exhausted museum? Is it B, a reform shock therapy moment, where someone tears up the rule book and the country finds out the hard way whether that works? Or is it C, something almost nobody is betting on, like a surprise growth boom, a new industry, or a leadership change that resets the whole story? I genuinely want to read your take because the smartest predictions I see usually live in the comment section, not on the news. Because here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Britain is not the next country to fall apart. Britain is the first to show everyone else what the new version of falling apart actually looks like. Slow, quiet, expensive, and almost invisible until the morning you wake up and realize nobody you know can afford to live in your capital city anymore.